Hello,
Hello,
everyone.
everyone.
And
And
Katie, there's
Katie,
an
there's an
echo.
echo. Should be gone now.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome. You're very welcome to this evening's Red Door event, opening the door to Vanessa Lampert. And can I just ask you all to keep on mute the whole time, unless towards the end when we have some Q&A. Do feel free to put your messages in the chat. Tell us where you're from, anything you want. And towards the end, if you want to ask questions, feel free to put them in there, or you can raise a hand and we'll try and find you among all these little windows. So yeah, that we're just finish or just let a few more people in because there are a whole lot more just arriving. And then we'll get started. So yeah, let me find Vanessa's bio and I'll start telling you about that. So okay, so I'll come clean straight away. Vanessa and I know each other from the MA, which we both did 2017 to 2019. Vanessa's been a bit of a shining star in the poetry world. So Vanessa, her bio that she sent me is as follows. Vanessa Lampert is an acupuncturist, mentor, editor, and teacher of poetry. Her work is widely published, most recently in Magma, the Oxford Times, the Rialto, the London Magazine, Under the Radar, Oxford Poetry, and Poetry London, which is fantastic. She runs workshops nationwide for adults and in schools and volunteers at Oxford Poetry Library. She was co-founder, together with Roger Bloor, who's here, and myself, of the Alchemy Spoon magazine, and she volunteers at Oxford Poetry Library and in schools. She's won the Cafe Writers, Edward Thomas, Ashdown Forest and Sentinel prizes, and the Ver Poetry Prize twice. She's been placed in many other competitions, including commendations in the Troubadour, Magma, Bridport, Verve, and national competitions. Vanessa's pamphlet On Long Loan was published by Live Canon in 2020, and her full collection, Say It With Me, was published by Seren in 2023. Poems from that collection have been published in the Daily Telegraph Poem of the Week and the Forward Prize Anthology 2024. She's recently edited a collection of poems on the theme of well-being for Candlestick Press. So, Vanessa, you are so very welcome. Before we start, could I just remind people to keep themselves on mute so we don't have any background noise? That would be really kind. So I wonder if we could start with Vanessa reading a poem. And I wonder if you could tell me which poem you're most proud of and why, and perhaps read that one.
It's a difficult question, that thing of pride, isn't it? Um, I was uh, I was thinking about that and kind of like awake in the night worrying about it, Mary. And I just thought I'll read a poem that I like.
Okay.
That I don't think of myself. I think of myself as a bit of an indoorsy kind of poet, but I have written the odd nature poem, which forces me to go out into the world and have a bit of vitamin D. So this is a poem called Hummingbird Hawk Moth.
Brilliant.
September and rebellious summer rose late and alarmingly hot. I was weary, headed home, when some small strangeness tugged at my attention. Airborne over the courtyard it was, an alien of softness and thrum. A velvet remnant, an orange purse bursting with nectar, its wings a haze, its horn a gold-tipped blue. It seemed more bird than any moth I knew. Something about its wildness, the hum of its life and hurry, made me miss you. It hovered above the mania of pink valerian in bloom. When it flew away, I cycled home, curious to learn its habits and its name. Hummingbird hawk moth, tiny messenger, blown across the sea on a warning wind. Poor creature, wouldn't survive a northern winter. Aren't we tender with so little time?
Oh, Vanessa, that's beautiful. I think you read that. Did you? Was that highly commended in Winchester?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remembered you reading it there, and I've always loved that poem. I remember when it came to a workshop once, so it's
Yeah,
fantastic.
you've probably seen most of the things I've written over time, Mary.
And that's why you're here. Well, I'm sorry it gave you a sleepless night, but I wonder if you could tell everyone, we've got a wonderful audience here, and it's lovely to have so many people here. I wonder if you could tell people what brought you to poetry in the first place.
I think I remember having a response to a poem in school when I was about maybe 14. It was a Ted Hughes poem, and we had a sort of supply teacher, and I remember poetry was just quite dull. It was kind of, as we all know, it's sort of not matched to the age group that you are. You get kind of given war poetry when you're just beginning to kind of feel excited about being in the world, and you don't really want to think about that. So I think it's very off-putting. And I remember this supply teacher reading this Ted Hughes poem, and she said, "A pig lay on a barrow dead," and then she said, "Listen to how dead the pig sounds in those words." And I remember thinking, "Wow, that's just kind of thumpingly true." And then I didn't really have any more good poetry teaching at all. And my dad died long before I ever started writing. I didn't start writing really until I was in my 50s. And about when my dad died, I took all of the poetry books that he had out of his flat, as if I kind of knew maybe at some point I would want to read them and understand them. So we had a bit of a tragedy in our family. My brother died, and although obviously the kind of worst part of that story is that he lost his life young, but it did have, in that kind of selfish way that we kind of return to ourselves at such times, it did have an impact on me of kind of making me realize that I wasn't going to live forever, and it wasn't enough to think one day I'll do this or one day I'll do that, that I ought to really do stuff. And so I enrolled on an Arvon called Starting to Write, and I was really scared. I was probably in about 2016, maybe something like that, 2015, and and then I was with all these other scared people who I thought, oh, they'll all be kind of so much better than me, and they'll know stuff that I don't know, but everybody was scared. And it was just a really wonderful environment of just being kind of given this space and being fed, and being with people that just wanted to kind of carve out a little bit of time to try something new. And I did that. This course was partly novel, partly short story, and partly poetry. And I was, well, not sure at that point what I wanted to write, and I did write a novel. And then I wrote a couple of short stories, and then I did another Arvon with the Sansoms, and I really, really loved that course, and then I just wanted to do that. So that's when I kind of started focusing much more of my attention on reading and thinking about poetry, and ultimately trying to write my own poems.
That's really interesting. And you said something about being selfish after a little bit selfish after your brother died because it sort of took you into this way. I think it's a way of making sense of things, wouldn't you say?
Well, I think the writing of poetry in particular makes sense of things, because I
Mm.
find it a really magical process when you write. You I don't know, you get a few kind of words jangling in your head that sound nice together, and you write them down, and then you kind of a thing forms around it that isn't necessarily anything to do with the original thought. And I think it's sort of like I mean, Glyn Maxwell on when we did our MA, Mary, he used to say, didn't he, that a poem was creaturely, and you don't really have complete control over the nature of that creature. It sort of tells you what it wants to be,
Yeah.
and sometimes and if you kind of stay focused on that image of it being a creature, sometimes when something isn't working in the poem, when you're reading it, it's because the creature is saying, I'm not that kind of creature.
Mm.
You sort of think, oh, that doesn't really suit this creature. And so, or when you're working with somebody else and they say, "Oh, I don't really like those lines, can you get rid of those?" Or you kind of like might hate them for a minute and then I realize later on that they were completely right.
That's
And then those lines kind of have to go, and you see that they didn't belong to that creature. It just wasn't that creature's kind of paraphernalia. So yeah, that's why I think I just think poetry is magic in that way.
that's a lovely way of putting it. And you mentioned that after your father died, you took over all his poetry books. Did you come from a literary family?
No, absolutely not at all. I come from a family where my parents chose their, rather kind of humblingly, really, they chose their work because um, they would have enough money to buy a house and also have a reasonable pension when they retired. So both of my parents worked in banks, but my father had a kind of um, he was quite an intellectual person with not enough time. He did do an open university degree in his 40s, but he also had lots of family as well. He was married twice, and so he had four children, and a lot of his time was just given to making ends meet and being a dad.
Yeah.
Um, I think that there were books around, and he had a desire to for his children to be in to kind of understand that world to some extent. So that was there. My mum is much more practical. She's I still have my mum, and she's still cooking for us, and I feel
Oh,
embarrassed now when someone says, "What are you doing at the weekend?" and I say, "I'm going around my mum's and she's cooking my dinner."
oh,
So
that
yeah.
sounds wonderful. In fact, it makes me go on to skip a question. I'll come back to the other one later, but you too are very busy because you talk about your father having two families and how busy everything is. But you are, besides being a highly accomplished poet and a seasoned workshop leader and editor, you're also an acupuncturist and a mother. How do you balance the demands of different careers as well as the demands of family and still have time to write such brilliant poems?
Um, I think I think that it's a really difficult thing to do. And I haven't really started writing until my children were able to, manage their own lives. Um, I I think that it's easy for creativity to come last. So I read this fantastic I think it was an article in The Guardian by Maggie O'Farrell about it was called something like How to Write. And she said, walk past the piles of stuff on the stairs waiting to be taken upstairs. Ignore the fact that your feet are sticking to the kitchen floor. Don't hoover. Don't don't answer texts, don't answer emails, just sit and write. And I feel like you have to put it first. You have to think about it as being important work, even though it might be just the work of your heart and you really want to do it. It's still work, and it has to be given space. And if you don't give it space, and there's a part of you that feels sad. I think if there's a creative part of you and you're not being creative, I really do feel like you can't really be happy.
Mhm.
That there's a little kind of something inside you going, what about me? I want to be given some love as well." And so I don't have a lot of time for it, but when I have time that I can claim for myself, I'm quite fierce about shutting the door of my study and being, giving myself that.
That's brilliant. Yes, I totally agree with what you say about the if you don't write and sort of let your creativity be expressed in some way, then the energy sort of goes negatively inwards. So for me, certainly, I found the doing the poetry MA forced me to put poetry center stage. I wonder how the poetry MA or mentoring, if you've had mentoring, has advanced your poetry career.
I think that the MA was the biggest step for me into taking it seriously. And part of that was just because I would be really ashamed if I didn't if I didn't try and do it well. And so, the fact that it was going back to school and handing work in and having it marked and, you know, but there being deadlines and um, um, you know, uh, the sense that if I'd given that a bit longer, I could maybe have done it a bit better was really such a driving force.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, if you're putting that much energy into, so I started to work 4 days a week and try to write when I did the MA, try to write for two. And it is quite a pressure, isn't it? I mean, remember kind of all those poems that we had to hand in every term, it was pretty full on, really.
Yeah.
If you're not going to kind of feel, I remember once having a tutorial with Glyn and I'd written this line, and I was kind of a bit embarrassed when I read the poem out. It sounded a bit kind of like I said, am I being a bit, oh, I said something like, am I being a bit poetessy? And he went, no, goddessy. So I was kind of, there's always that fear that you'll be kind of exposed as trying too hard as well. So yeah, I put loads and loads into that MA. I really did.
Yeah.
And it's one of the best things I've ever done for sure.
That's really fantastic. Well, I know that what is it? I've written it somewhere down that what Glyn says about you, about your poetry. He says he called you one of the most enthralling new poets on the English scene. And Tamar Yoselov says you pack the seismic shifts of our lives into humming lines, and Matthew Dickman calls your poems lodestars. So with your poetry, we all know poetry isn't straight biography, but you often write in the first person, either singular or plural. So how easy do you find it to translate your life into poetry or bring people you know into a poem? I mean, you mentioned that your brother very sadly died very young, I think by suicide, wasn't it? And so I just wonder, it's one thing to write about the dead, but about the living as well. I just wonder how easy it is for you to write about known people.
I think I have a rule for myself that I was reading, I think it was an autobiography by Mark Doty. Maybe I read it at exactly the right moment at some point on the MA where he says he's talking about writing a lot about his father in quite a critical way. And somebody interviewing him says, was your father okay with these things that you said about him? And he said in this book, no, he never spoke to me again. And so I feel very strongly that um, and anyone who is reading something that I've written shouldn't be hurt by my words. So I feel like if there's something angry or bitter that I need to say about anything, like privately is probably better, and certainly not. I wouldn't want to write that down. I feel like when you're a relative beginner, as I do think of myself like that, just because of the time that I've been writing is quite short. I feel like inevitably there's a lot of autobiography because those stories are always near to you. You can, there's lots of little anecdotes that you have in your head that you can think, oh, that reminds me of such, and then you can write that story. But ultimately, you do sort of run out of those and you have to start to, you know, push at the edges of other things, which maybe is when some more interesting we'll see like more interesting stuff maybe comes out when you've got the stories off your chest a bit.
That's really interesting because, yeah, I think it was Malika Booker who said something about we're always writing the same poem. There is an underlying question that we're seeking to answer. So with you saying that you've maybe not quite run out of stories, but you're sort of going into a deeper level. Would you say it's the same thing, but just at a deeper level all the time? And what is it? The question.
um yeah, I don't know whether there's an underlying question or a whole kind of series of them, especially as I sort of enter the kind of like last section of my life. I feel like the it's more for me about kind of what does the poem have to tell me? So I've been lucky enough occasionally to have had things that I've written reviewed, and when I've won things and judges sometimes write a report, and you kind of like they've seen something that you didn't know about, but it's interesting to read their interpretation, and is it uncovering a kind of another truth. I
Mhm.
mean, in my job as an acupuncturist, we're often trying to get to the bottom of things and not necessarily believe what the person's saying, but what's really going on.
Yeah.
And I just feel like poems deliver really interesting messages to us all the time, which aren't about what we thought was going on. Like they uncover mysteries to us.
Maybe we could hear another of your poems at this stage.
Oh, thank you. Um, okay, I'd like to read a poem that maybe is about uh I've written a few poems in my book about my brother, but this is a poem which is sort of where it's moving a little bit away from the story of the actual story of him, and kind of going more into something a bit more kind of quirky, which when I can write more like that, like when you kind of like take a weird thing and crash it against another thing, I think often quite an interesting poem comes out of that. And I quite like this poem that I've written, and it's also in in Oxford Poetry, which has this really lovely paper thing on the outside of it. Like they're always different every time, and it's lovely paper, and it's called "You Let It Go." Of her bottom, Julie from the gym said, like life, it's a one-way street. You agreed, but here you are, curled like a shrimp, as that certainty is breached by colonoscopy. All yesterday, you drank deep of the terrible river Styx. Now your bowel is shining clean up there on screen. The nurse who holds your hand whispers marvelous prep, and the love you feel for her is fentanyl. When your brother came home on leave, he polished his boots all weekend. You asked the nurse, was he frightened or keen? Why did he take his life? Her hand in yours is warm. The walls of your bowel are pink. Once your husband bought a live lobster from a fisherman in St. Agnes. It was a watery, greyish blue. You let it go. It ran home down the beach to the sea. You look up at the nurse and say, all I think I wanted was to save a life.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's really so moving. And I'm really intrigued by your poems. You often get a slant into them that is just a little bit different. And I'm thinking of things like I remember the poem you wrote, Woodland, which won the 2020 Ver Prize, and Elegy for Two Placenters, which was placed in the Kent and Sussex 2021. And so I'm wondering how much is, thinking of your process now, how much of a poem is conscious and how much does it just come? Do you just flood from the unconscious?
Um, I think that probably that need to produce so much work
Mm.
via the MA, there was that, it's sort of, you had to be constantly reaching for stuff all the time. And I think that being more in that kind of mindset where um, you kind of you appreciate the quirkiness of a thing and then commit it to paper. It's a discipline, isn't it? You that writer Elizabeth Gilbert once said something about poetry. She said that a poem is like a bird, and it kind of like flies over you, and if you're quick enough and you grab it by the tail feathers, you've kind of got something. But if you just go, I'll write that down later, you really aren't going to. You know, the moment's gone. So I forgot your question. What was your question again?
I was asking how much of your in your processing in your process of writing a poem is conscious, and how much does it sort of just come up from bubble up from the unconscious, and then you sort of work on it there, sort of, yeah.
I feel like it's largely conscious.
Mm.
And maybe if there's unconscious stuff there, that's the stuff I'm talking about when someone makes a comment on it. Maybe they're saying, "Oh, I see, you know, that's come from another place." But I feel like it a lot of it is sort of in the material world when it begins, and when it, you know, the kind of things that I'm writing down are things that I've witnessed or thought about or
Yeah.
kind
So,
of like
so
weirded up in some way.
yeah, yeah, no, well, and it very successfully. And so, do you have a sort of like a guide to go through the conscious? Because I remember years back when I started with Pascal Petit, she gave us all this. It's almost like go through the senses, and you do make sure you've got some color, and all of this. So, do you have a sort of not a rule as template rule or something, but some kind of template to go?
Oh, I have a kind of a a feeling of that there are millions of poems that people could read, and why would they read this one? I have to make them read it by being interesting right at the beginning, and like grab their attention. So like jump up and down and sing or something, wave of color. But maybe some of that comes from editing. I also feel like the end of the poem has to flow outwards in some way so that it isn't easy to shut the book or it isn't easy to stop thinking about the poem and just quickly go and, you know, like put the oven chips in the oven or something. You know, it's kind of, um, it has to like open, it has to stay open and stay um, in a little bit intriguing, flowing outwards. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, that sort of ties in with something that Brian Bilston said on the back of your collection, I think, which is that you tell stories that become universal in their rendering, that you've opened them up. They starts quite narrative, but you open it up. And so, yeah, that sort of, I'd say that probably equates with that. So who would you say will have been your biggest poetic influences? Your poet, which poets?
I have this lovely group that I run called Sevenish, and I'm always banging on about Matthew Dickman, who did very kindly write something on the back of my book. And he is my favorite poet, and people are always saying, "Get a room," because I just never tire of his poems. I really like that he writes. He had a brother who took his life, and he writes about that, but his poems are also full of humor, and I like that. I do want to have a bit of a laugh when I read poems. I do want people to smile when they read mine. Um, and so I would say, I mean, Karen, you introduced me to Karen Solé, of course, Mary, years ago. And she's such a different poet
Yeah.
from Matthew Dickman, but so complex and so intellectual and so kind of intricate and difficult. And I could never begin to write anything like that, but I admire it enormously. And I've read all of her books. I have all of her books. And if I ever lend one to somebody, I always want it back. Um, and I was really delighted when she won the TSLE. I thought that was so wonderful and so well deserved.
Absolutely, I quite agree. I mean, she writes a lot about ecology, which is not an area that you tend to go into too much.
I think I admire the complex meandering language
Yeah.
of her poems and also the vast landscapes of her homeland that we don't have here. You know, that well, um, most of us don't have that much space.
Mm.
And so I'm really intrigued by what you know, the impact of the way that you live and the space that you live on in the way that you write.
Yeah.
And I'm at, you know, so the
Mm.
contrasting vastly. She's always like driving 500 miles somewhere, isn't she, in her poems?
In,
And
yeah. In
yeah,
Canada, that's not going to be massive, is it?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you told me once that you write very slowly, even painstakingly slowly. And so how do you know when something's finished? Do you go back and change things if they're not accepted? Are they ever
Oh,
not
like,
accepted?
oh yeah, of course, yes, all the time.
Mm,
Um, I I kind of have I think I'm quite private about what I'm writing until it's relatively near to being done. So I did actually go to London to a group that I belonged to last week, and I took a poem with me, and I was very kind of well, I was amused, but also quite happy when there was nothing really to say. Because I'd sort of like been working on it for so long and tweaking it that they just kind of gave it back to me. Imagine that. It doesn't mean it's necessarily finished, but I'm not I'm not really interested in taking a poem to other people and asking them to sort it out for me. I want it to be mine, and I want the kind of foolish errors that I've made to be pointed out to me, and maybe and I you know and of course amazing kind of things like why don't you put that sentence before or before like move that one, and it's amazing the kind of community of being around poets. I love that
yeah.
too, the
Mhm.
way they think in that same weird way that you do. But I do largely do about 98% of it totally solo. When I got nearly to the end of the MA, Glyn invited me to carry on working with him, and so I occasionally have a one-to-one with Glyn still, but not very often. Maybe I take about maybe 10, a bundle of 10 with him to him, and we look at them. But yeah, a lot of it is on my own.
So, and what are you working on right now?
Well, I'm writing I've finished a second collection, and I'm not sure. It's like a hodgepodge of, hawk moths thrown together with lobsters and family, and who will I don't know what to kind of make of what its enduring themes will be.
Mhm.
Um, Hopefully it will get published, but it's still in the kind of making stage at the moment.
Mhm. And so I was thinking you were talking quite a lot about poetry and your process and things. And I just wonder if you what is poet if you could sum up what poetry is for you in a sentence, or what you like best about poetry, how would that be?
Um,
What would
I
you
think that what I what I like best about it is it's as near to kind of being a child again around language as any kind of writing ever could be, because it invites you to see things in an original way. Like when you were a small child and you kind of described something to somebody in your way, probably when you got it wrong, they laughed and you corrected you, and then you never did it that way again. And when you're writing poetry, you're trying really hard to kind of return to that innocence and kind of say to your reader, let me say it like this, let me say it like that. And because it's a quirky way of saying something, when they do see what you're saying, it's a very delightful connection. Yes, it's like a way to be not jaded, I think.
Mm.
Writing poetry is, yeah, it's a young thing for me.
That's nicely put. I like that very much. And do you have any particular poetry dreams?
Um, I have a dream to one day have a poem in poetry review. That's a kind of vain dream, a sort of a dream of vanity.
Oh.
Um, I have had poems in the hands of poetry review continuously since 2018. So that means that as something is rejected, I send something else, and it's always been a no. But that makes that doesn't I don't think I get kind of battered too hard by rejection. I tend to kind of think onwards and just, I'll write something else then, and I'll send it off again. Um, so yeah, that's my main one. I think I would love to have a poem and poetry review.
So I'm sure you will. So that's a really
Hopefully Wayne will hear this.
I don't know if he signed up for this, but it's going to be on YouTube anyway, so maybe he'll find it. I was going to say though about that you've got a very healthy attitude towards rejection. It seems to me that it's just like, okay, I send something straight out. Would you then go back to the poem and change it, change the title, change anything in it, or look at it again, or are you satisfied? No, this is good, and just send it elsewhere.
I don't think anything is necessarily really finished. Um, uh, so yesterday I think you mentioned that I volunteer at Oxford Poetry Library, and yesterday we ran a group there called Reading Circle, and I took a poem of Declan Ryan's to Reading
Oh
Circle. And
yes.
one of the things that I love about the poem is called Trinity Hospital. It's the last poem in his book.
Mhm.
And one of the things I love about the poem is that I don't have any criticism of it. I can't see anything wrong with it at all. I can't, you know how it is when you read a lot and you edit a lot, you just get really critical of everything, unfortunately. So when you come across a poem that's seems to be absolutely perfect, it's just really pleasing.
Yeah.
I don't often feel that about my own poems. I often feel I could. There's a poem in my book where I went to speak to my editor just before it got published, and she took the last line out, said, "Why don't you take the last line out?" And I do actually really regret that now, because I felt like the line should be there. But uh,
So it,
they're just kind of, they're not a poem isn't usually a perfect thing. It's a kind of,
yeah.
I'm happy to go back to it. I wouldn't, if it gets sent back to me, I always would look at it again. That was a long-winded way of.
No, it makes me intrigued. Which poem was that? And is with the
It's
ghost line?
called Wimbledon 2020 in my book.
Oh yeah, I remember about your father.
Yeah,
Watching.
yeah.
I remember
About
that
Wimbledon getting cancelled,
one.
yeah.
Okay, okay. So what was the line?
The poem, the line, let me just quickly find it. Um, the line the poem originally ended with,
In a garage with a leaky roof.
yeah, that's the poem. I'm
Oh
just,
no, 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 no. His victory and my victory.
have you got my book there?
Yeah, I got it here.
What page is that, Mary?
It's page 42.
Okay. So, oh, I've just realized this book hasn't got any page numbers. Um,
It's in the middle.
okay, so that poem ended originally with, and all day God, and all day God and heaven will be real, and
Oh,
that ends on something different.
yeah.
So,
So, what advice would you have for people who are listening here? Stick with your gut about the last lines. Is that it? Or
I
what advice
think,
would you offer?
well, um, yeah, I think probably maybe don't make a rash decision. Ask to think about that kind of thing,
Mm,
because I was just so kind of blown away that somebody would want to publish a book that I'd written, really. So I was kind of open to anything, and very kind of plastic about it.
yeah.
Um,
Uh,
so yeah, it's not it's not earth-shattering
no.
that line's not there, but I usually read it when I read from, if I ever read that poem, I do put it back in.
Yeah, I can hear that. So we're coming to the end of the interview part of the interview. We're going to have a Q&A, but can we first have another poem from you?
Yeah, lovely, thank you. Um, uh, I think I'll read a poem that I feel like this is, a lot of my poems are quite long, and this is quite a short poem, and it kind of I feel like there's a lot held inside it, and I don't mind telling lies in poems really, but this is a poem that doesn't have any lies in it. And I was very privileged to have this in the Forward Prizes book a few years ago, and it's called Tower. My father took me to London when my whole fist could fit inside his palm. On the tube, he lifted me up and, holding tight, stepped out from our carriage to the next, through the filthy, hurtling dark to thrill me, then did it again. By the river, he bought chestnuts roasted on a brazier. My red gloves swung on strings. I looked up at the tower of him, and grief would never dare to touch my life.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's so moving. I remember that one. Thank you so much for reading it so beautifully. So, Vanessa, I can't thank you enough for all your generous and really interesting answers to my questions. And I now want to throw it open to the floor. So if anyone has a question, you can either put it in the chat or raise a hand and I'll try and find you, or one of my co-hosts will try and find you. So this is your chance, guys. Can you see anyone?
They've had enough.
Sorry?
They've had enough.
If you have a question, I'll tell you what, maybe just unmute and ask it. Wow.
Oh, Sue's asked a question. Does
Okay.
Vanessa ever have that poem that arrives quickly, fully formed? No, never.
So how do poems first arrive for you then, Vanessa? Is it from something someone says? Is it a memory? Is it a workshop prompt? Is it reading other people's poems? Is it overhearing something? What?
I'd say more than anything, it's reading. Yeah, reading, sometimes quirky thing that somebody says. Um, Occasionally it's like a little like one time it was actually one of my patients was telling me that his daughter rescued hens from a factory farm and they didn't like they didn't understand the rain and I asked permission to can I write a poem about that because that's been said in a confidential space, and so occasionally there'll be something like that, but mostly it's from reading other people's poems
Oh,
by a
that's
long, long way.
thank you. And there are a couple of questions here on form. How do you decide on the form of a poem? And then Nikki Kipax is saying, how long do you play with the form of a poem and how important are the line breaks?
I think the line breaks are absolutely crucial. Line breaks are one of my favorite parts of writing and also editing. Um, oh, I need sorry, there was a lot there. How do I decide on
The
the form?
form, yeah, deciding on the form.
Um, Sometimes it's as simple as kind of counting the lines and seeing how to, whether it could be divided in a particular way, and when it's been divided in a particular way, does that actually work? Uh, sometimes when you've written something, this magic thing happens, doesn't it? Whoa, tercets, look at that. There's a natural break after every three lines.
Mhm.
Um, I think the form's really important and I take a really long time. I would say kind of me doing 50 drafts would not be unusual.
Okay, okay. And do you read out loud while you're doing it, or do you read out loud in your head?
No, I read out loud only towards the end
Okay.
when
Mhm.
I kind of like most of it's in my head. Yeah.
Julian Bishop's asking if your writing style has changed as you've moved forward, and how, in what way?
Hi, Julian. Julian's always reading my poems before they ever go into the world. Um, I would say they are changing over time, for the reasons that I said before about kind of a lot of autobiographical, like the big stories of life, of my past life are probably already written down now. So I'm having to sort of kind of reach further into other places. Yeah.
Okay, okay. And then there's a question here from Roger Bloor, where of course from the days when you, Roger, and I started the Alchemy Spoon and everything. And Roger, who's got his own poetry launch on the 6th of March at the Poetry Cafe. I'll try and put the link in the chat. Roger's asking if your experience of editing as a magazine editor has influenced your attitude towards rejections.
Yeah, I really, really think it has because I think that um, you you're really hurting somebody's feelings when you say no to them, and it might be in a small way, but it's never easy. You have to kind of find ways to bounce back, um, and I think that what was the beginning part of the question? What has it influenced my own kind of
Your
feelings of
attitude towards rejections, yes.
um yeah, I think I know last time when I sent a poem to the Alchemy Spoon and that one got rejected, and I was really wishing I could get him to do a SOMA and see what you guys had said. But yeah, I just think
I'm
it,
sure we never rejected you, Vanessa.
no, you did. No,
Oh,
you actually did. Which is fine. I think, yeah, I also think that when we write, like on Facebook, I'm really happy to say that I've won this or that or the other. I think we have to remember that that's a little stab in somebody else's heart who entered that competition. And I just need to get more careful about that kind of thing, I think, if I ever win anything else. And yeah, we're very tender beings. We're all humans are tender beings, but poets especially so, in my opinion.
yeah. Okay, and we're probably going to wind up in a second, but Jean Hall has just said people often say they don't like poetry, then find they do. Have you experienced that? What did you say to convince them that poetry is wonderful?
I think that when people say they don't like poetry, it's probably because of what they were introduced to at the wrong time. Like if somebody gives you, um, I don't know, yeah, a First World War poet when you're 14 and all you want to do is kind of chase boys, you're going to be sort of a bit kind of deflated and disinterested. So I think that, you have to kind of, I remember feeling so excited when I came across Jack Underwood's poems because they're so mad and funny and kind of quirky and sort of anti-traditional poetry. So yeah, there's all kinds of poetry. You just have to find your poet.
Okay. Well, I think at this point we're going to wind up and just thank everyone for coming. An enormous, we'll ask everyone to unmute and give a big round of applause to Vanessa for her fabulous answers and for being here and for reading us some of her lovely poems. So thank you so much, Vanessa.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really lovely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you,
And
Nash.
and just before we leave, I'm just going to give a shout out for the end of March. We've got the end of March. We've got. Could you could that person mute themselves? The end of March, we've got another Red Door poet reading with Chris Hardy, Katie Griffiths, Hannah Bush Nielsen, and their guests Lara Frankina, Phil Kirby, and Susanna Fitzpatrick. And it's going to be a fabulous event. So check out the Facebook page and social media for the Eventbrite link. And look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.